I swear, Abbott's full enough already.
At least when you escort an inmate to death row, you know he's scheduled to get what he deserves.
Hey there guys, Nordic Warrior here, welcome back to my video game review series. First of all, apologies for the lack of reviews over the past month or so. As I mentioned back in January, I wanted to upload my Batman Arkham City playthrough that was meant to be up back in December. So that kinda took over my schedule for January and February. Now that that's finished, I can focus on reviews like this one for the foreseeable. Today we're going to be looking at what in my opinion is one of the most underrated survival horror games of the mid-2000s. The Suffering, released in 2004, developed by Surreal Software. This is going to be for the original Xbox version, which is the only version of the game I own. FYI, the game is also backwards compatible with the Xbox 360 and can be played in HD. On a side note, this just happens to be the 20th anniversary of the game. So yeah, the game is 20 years old now, but I digress. So The Suffering is a game that I've known about for a very long time, but never owned myself until very recently. I can remember having one of those Xbox magazine demo discs back in the day, which contained several trailers for upcoming games. And one of the trailers it contained was this game, The Suffering. I intended to get the game for a long time, but for whatever reason, never got round to it, until fairly recently when I just happened to get the game as a gift. I just finished the game for the first time, and I have to say that it's a game that took me by surprise for a few reasons, and I do have some mixed feelings on it. So the game doubles up as both a first and third person shooter, with survival horror aspects. The story of the game is a fairly interesting one. You play as a silent protagonist named Torque, who has been charged with the murder of his wife and children, and sentenced to death. It's established early on in the game that Torque doesn't actually know whether or not he's guilty of the crime, and seems completely bewildered by the whole thing, and neither confirms nor denies his innocence, claiming that he blacked out during the events of it, and he has no memory of the event at all.
You hear what this one did?
I don't want to know, and you know
He beat his ex-wife to a bloody pulp. Killed her with his fists.
Look, I said I didn't...
Then he drowned one son in the tub and threw the other out a window. Don't ask me to cry for him.
Inmate, is this true?
Oh, he won't say. Claims he blacked the whole thing out. A likely story. The needle's too good for him.
This is something that adds an air of mystery and ambiguity to the game's plot, which is something that's actually a deliberate choice from the developers to accommodate the game's morality system. More on that later. The game begins with Torque being escorted to his cell after being incarcerated in a messed up prison named Abbott State Penitentiary, which is located on a secluded island named Carnot Island. Shortly after you arrive, you learn that Abbott State is basically reserved for the worst kinds of criminals, child killers and the like, and there's a huge amount of tension building between the guards and the inmates. After being locked in your cell, the island suddenly gets hit with an earthquake, which for some reason leads to the prison coming under attack from various horrific, demonic monsters, straight from your nightmares.
Slick! Slick! Goose, you still there? Yeah, I'm still here. And it wasn't me. If that's what you're thinking, I didn't touch that. What was that? Goose?
Torque escapes his cell, and will need to survive the attack and find a way to escape. You will have to traverse the prison, as well as the rest of the island, defeat the monsters and find a way to get out. Without giving away too much of the story, it's definitely a very interesting one, with several twists and turns along the way. And like all the best survival horror games, it has a certain amount of ambiguity and intrigue regarding what's actually going on, and what it actually represents. As far as the overall gameplay goes, as I mentioned before, the game doubles up as both a first-person and third-person shooter, and it's incredibly fast-paced and action-packed, which I suppose might put off some survival horror fans, since this game isn't overly reliant on horror. Rather, the game feels like more of a generic shooter of the time, but in a survival horror setting. Initially, this is something that concerned me about the game, but the longer I played, the more I actually grew to appreciate it. Again, I'll explain more on that later. The majority of the game consists of traversing the island, fighting your way through hordes of monsters, and solving some basic puzzles here and there. One of the first items you'll require is a flashlight, that can of course be used to light up dark areas. The flashlight will have limited power, meaning at times you will have to be quite conservative with how much you use it. You can also find batteries for your flashlight scattered around the game, so keep an eye out for these. In addition to batteries, another collectible item is the Zombium pills. These are simply portable health packs that increase your health when you choose to use them. Use these sparingly if you can. You can carry up to 9 of them at a time, so use them well. The shooting mechanics of the game are excellent and really well designed. What helps in this regard is you have plenty of weapons to find and use throughout. You start off with a shiv, which is your standard melee weapon. It's pretty useless against most enemies, but better than nothing. Later on you can find a fireman's axe, which is the better melee weapon of the game. In addition to being used in combat, the melee weapons are also useful for removing obstructions in your way. As far as guns go, there are several. You have a revolver, which is great from close range. You can also dual wield revolvers for double damage. Thankfully there's plenty of ammo throughout, so the revolver is probably the weapon you'll be relying on most. You have a Tommy gun, which is better from long range and can hold much more ammo. A badass shotgun, which can defeat some enemies in one hit, and is of course very effective in close range. You can also unlock a flamethrower later in the game, which you'll assemble yourself. In addition to these guns, there are also several turrets placed around the game that can be mounted and used. These are very useful when dealing with multiple enemies. There's also a secret weapon in the game that can be unlocked called the Gonzo gun, one of the most bizarre weapons you'll ever see in gaming.
Christ, they must have a chicken in the back firing eggs with this ass like a Tommy gun.
But yeah, I digress. In addition to guns and melee weapons, there are also several throw-in weapons. For example, you have flashbang grenades, that can of course blind and distract enemies. TNTs, which are insanely powerful dynamites. Molotov cocktails for lighting enemies on fire. And shrapnel grenades, which are pretty self-explanatory. So yeah, the game has plenty of weapons to find and use throughout, and it helps to keep the game's combat feeling fresh. In addition to weapon variety, the game also has a bit of enemy variety. For example, there are several nightmarish monsters to fight throughout, and some of these are genuinely terrifying, with extremely disturbing designs. In a way, they kind of remind me of the types of enemies you'd see in Silent Hill or Resident Evil. Some of them even look like failed experiments of some kind. For example, you have the Slayers, these spiderish like enemies that crawl around on walls and ceilings and have knives for hands and feet. Marksmen, which are like an amalgamation of a firing squad and their victim, having machine guns attached to their backs. Mainliners, which try to give you a lethal injection. There are usually a bunch of these trying to swarm your position and overwhelm you. Noosemen, which hang from the ceiling and try to grab you. Burrowers, which will attack you from below the ground. These are a pain in the ass when they sneak up on you. Festers, which are these giant bloated enemies that try to smash you with a huge bludger. And without a shadow of a doubt, the most annoying enemy in the game, the Inferners. These are annoying fire demons that fly around and try to trap you with flames. The annoying thing about these is that they almost feel impossible to hit at times, and cause you to waste most of your ammo, a really annoying enemy. They kind of remind me of those annoying ninja chicks from Saints Row the Third, but I digress. These were clearly put here to be a difficulty spike, since they are really annoying and you only fight them later on in the game. Occasionally you'll also have to fight prison guards who for some reason try to shoot you, despite being in the same situation as you are.
Inmate's got a gun! Drop him! Inmate's got a gun! Drop him!
Some of them will help you though.
We got a better chance to survive if we stick together. But you will do exactly what I say, or I will punch a hole in your sorry ass. Got it? That's the last of them. Handle yourself all right for an inmate.
So yeah, the game has plenty of enemy variety, doing its bit to keep the combat fresh. Adding to the variety of the game's combat, early in the game you unlock the ability to transform into a huge monster that has powerful melee attacks. Basically, as you fight enemies, your insanity meter fills up. Once it's fully filled, you will have the option to transform. This is badass. However, it has a negative effect. Transforming into the monster slowly drains your health, meaning you will have to change back before it's too late, and you end up failing. This of course can help you defeat tougher enemies and bail you out of a tight spot. It's an aspect of the game that the developers didn't need to add, but I'm glad they did. Another aspect of the combat which I found quite interesting is that at certain points in the game, it feels as if you're encouraged to run past enemies, since you can do that sometimes, and I feel as if that was intentional to add to the overall atmosphere and fear factor. There are areas where you can activate a spotlight and use it to take out enemies, since many of them are damaged by light. I mentioned before that the game has some basic puzzle solving. Basically certain levels will have an obstacle that you'll need to overcome, and there will usually be some little puzzle to remove it, such as moving a box or a cabinet to block a drain and flood a room with water to put out fire. Things like that slow down the pace a bit and basically give you something to think about. Throughout the game you will come across various NPCs who are also trying to escape the prison. Some of them are prison guards, and others are fellow inmates. Some of them are quite funny and just there for comic relief.
Name is Sergey. Wait. Are you really there? Or maybe I am dreaming again. No? No, you real, huh?
He's a filthy immigrant. He's so friendly. He's a disgusting addict.
But Kennedy, Scott, try to find out what is happening. Me? I say why. I hear the sounds. Boom, crash. Ah! I've seen some things through the doorway there. Things I don't want to see again. Understand? I stay right here. We're safe. And I have pipe to keep me company.
And others are a little bit more serious.
All you inmates think CEOs are evil, but we are prisoners in Abbott as much as you. You ever think of that?
These characters will usually die at some point no matter what you do, but not always. I mentioned before that the game has a morality system. Basically when you come across an NPC, a voice in your head will tell you to kill them, another will tell you to help them. You have 3 choices. You can either kill them, help them, or ignore them. These choices will all contribute to the game's 3 different endings. For example, you may come across an old guy who's trying to escape the island on his raft. Help him escape, and that contributes to the good ending. Help the prison guard get to a local town to find his family. You get the picture. I really like this aspect of the game since it does its bit to add to the replay value. As you play through the game, you often get visions, hallucinations, and flashbacks to help convey Torque's backstory, and give some context to what happened to his family.
They're with us now.
And it's also implemented into the morality system. When you help a character, Torque's wife lets her approval be known.
Good luck! Don't let the bastards keep you down!
Set him free.
One issue that I have with it though, is it highlights one major problem with the game, the AI. The AI of this game is truly awful. Your AI teammates are worse than useless in combat, constantly getting stuck, getting lost or going the wrong way, and even standing in the way of your attacks. It makes trying to protect them a complete pain in the ass. Plus the rewards you get for helping them, aside from the game's ending, are pretty useless. For example, for helping the old guy with the raft, I think he gave me a map, which I barely used.
I left you a valuable map up near the sewer entrance.
Long story short, you don't have much of an incentive to do this, and the AI is very poor. Another issue I have with the game is the overall presentation. The level design is generally quite good and quite varied, with plenty of diverse locations and aesthetics, such as the maze-like prison itself, the exterior locations of the island such as the woods and the beach, cave systems, sewers, and even a dark, creepy, abandoned insane asylum with a disturbing history. This is all well and good, but unfortunately the game is a bit of a mixed bag in terms of how it all looks. Some of the backgrounds and textures look truly awful and poorly designed. For example, look at this. These are supposed to be trees, what even are they? The character models look okay for the time, and the enemy designs are excellent, but the graphics and presentation of the game itself leave a lot to be desired in my opinion. It's not a major criticism, but I thought I'd point it out. One aspect of the game's presentation that does succeed, however, is the sound design. The game's music as well as the ambient sound effects really add to the atmosphere. This brings me to something I alluded to earlier, one of the criticisms this game got on its release, and that is that, despite the disturbing visuals and atmosphere, the game just isn't that scary. And that's true, but here's the thing, it wasn't really supposed to be. In the behind the scenes interviews, the developers make it perfectly clear that the player was supposed to feel like a badass, being thrown into this nightmarish situation, and being the only one who's able to handle it, making the game kind of a power fantasy, and making it feel liberating in a sense.
A tough character that no matter what he was doing, he always came through as like a really solid, calm, tough guy. And then he looked cool no matter what he was doing. Like he was just shooting a gun, he looked good shooting a gun, and he looked tough and carried out an attitude throughout.
I think the primary thing we want to do is make the player feel that though they were in this intensely frightening and life-threatening situation, they were in control of a character that could make it through if only they were able to manage it themselves. It's not like in some horror movies where the main characters are sort of weak and constantly tripping over roots as they're trying to run away from the guy and they can just barely manage to survive. Torque is someone who can take on an army of creatures and blast them to bloody bits and then be ready for more.
Torque is your typical gun-wielding, stoic alpha male badass protagonist who can handle anything the game throws at him, and I think this works. Although on a side note, he does die from a little bit of fall damage, which is very annoying I have to say. So many games try too hard to be scary, to the point where it just comes across cheesy and gimmicky, whereas you got the sense that the developers at Surreal knew what this game was. It's an action game, it's fast paced and it's hectic, and it just so happens to take place in a survival horror environment. Again, this is something that got the game a lot of criticism back in the day, but me personally, I actually think it works. One major criticism I do have, however, is the lack of interesting boss battles. The game has a few boss battles, but unfortunately these are incredibly lame and feel tacked on. The final boss is one of the most disappointing final bosses I have ever experienced in a game. Thankfully though, the game does have plenty of bonus features. For example, I briefly mentioned before, you have the behind the scenes interviews with the developers on the making of the game. In addition to that, you also have a short documentary on an abandoned prison.
They were incredibly violent, disease-ridden. Sometimes disease would wipe out the entire prison population.
That was quite interesting and not something I would have expected to be in the game. You also have a trailer for the game PsyOps, which was an action-adventure game from that same year. In addition to these features, you also have some concept art, as well as a detailed description of each of the game's enemy types, including some narration.
Slayer, I first witnessed these creatures jumping out of the ground itself. Their heads were detached from their torsos, held aloft by hideous contraptions.
Another feature the game has is a secret prologue level that you can unlock by completing the game. This was basically a short combat section that takes place right before the first level. So yeah, that's basically all I have to say about The Suffering. And yeah, the game holds up pretty well 20 years after its initial release. It has some major flaws such as terrible AI and some annoying enemy types and some inconsistent graphics and presentation, but for the most part I enjoyed the game. I give The Suffering a solid 7 out of 10. Thanks for watching guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did then please remember to like and subscribe for more videos just like it, because it really helps the channel. And I have many more retrospective reviews coming in the near future. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching and God bless.
Dios mío. A miracle, the fire is out. Again you prove yourself.